You were never just quiet. You were cautious. But they called it introversion. You weren't detached. You were protecting yourself. And over time, you believed it. You believed that silence was your nature, that hiding was who you are. But what if that's not true? What if what you've been calling introversion is actually something else? Something rooted in fear, not personality. Carl Jung, the man who helped define introversion, didn't say it was fear. He said it was orientation, a natural way of turning inward, of finding energy in solitude rather than in crowds. But fear doesn't give you energy. It drains you. Fear doesn't center you. It scatters you. And that's the difference. Introversion is a calm choice. Fear is a loud defense. Many people today wear the label introvert like it's a safe explanation for why they avoid life. But there's a problem with that. If you confuse fear with personality, you stop growing. You stop asking questions. You stop wondering what's possible for you beyond the silence. You begin to shape your life around what makes you feel safe, not what makes you feel alive. And slowly, that safe space becomes a trap. You stay quiet not because you're at peace, but because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing. You keep to yourself not because you love solitude, but because people have hurt you before. You avoid crowds not because they drain you, but because they remind you of how invisible you felt in the past. And every time you call this fear just being introverted, you let it settle deeper into your identity. The truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes you're not an introvert. You're just scared. Scared to be seen. Scared to be judged. Scared to be rejected. And that fear isn't wrong, but it doesn't deserve to own your life. It's not your identity. It's a wound. When Jung talked about introversion, he wasn't talking about social anxiety, insecurity, or emotional wounds. He was talking about a natural inward focus. True introversion doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like home. It feels like reflection, not avoidance. Presence, not absence. You feel rooted, not withdrawn. So if your silence feels like emptiness, if your distance feels like fear, then it's time to ask, am I really an introvert? Or have I just been too scared to show who I really am? If you spend your life calling fear personality, you begin to build everything around a false foundation. You pick careers that don't challenge you. You avoid relationships that require emotional risk. You stay quiet in rooms where your voice could change something, not because it's who you are, but because fear has convinced you it's safer that way. And little by little, your world becomes smaller. When you mislabel fear as introversion, you stop questioning it. You think, this is just who I am, when really, it's who you became to stay safe. But that safety comes with a hidden price. You lose parts of yourself, your confidence, your curiosity, your fire. You stop showing up in moments that matter. You wait for people to read your mind, to notice you without you ever stepping forward. And when they don't, you feel invisible. The longer you live this way, the more exhausted you become, not from doing too much, but from being too small for too long. Your mind is full of thoughts you never speak. Your heart is full of emotion no one sees. You go through life half present, afraid to take up space, afraid to be misunderstood, afraid to disappoint. Carl Jung warned about this. He believed that when we live out of alignment with our true nature, the psyche pushes back. It starts with tiredness, then sadness, then disconnection, and eventually, it feels like something inside you is fading. Not because you're broken, but because you've been pretending for so long you don't know who you are anymore. That's the cost of hiding. That's what happens when you let fear call itself your nature. The world doesn't just lose your voice, you lose it too. Not everyone who keeps to themselves is an introvert, and not every introvert is afraid. The difference between real introversion and fear-based withdrawal is simple, but powerful. Real introversion is a peaceful choice. Fear-based withdrawal is a painful escape. Carl Jung described introversion as a direction of energy. Introverts turn inward to process the world. They think deeply, feel fully, and often need quiet to recharge. They enjoy solitude not because they're scared of people, but because they value reflection. Being alone isn't a problem. It's where they find clarity. But fear-based withdrawal looks different. It comes from being hurt. It comes from rejection, embarrassment, or failure. Instead of choosing solitude, you hide in it. You pull away, not to reflect, but to protect. You avoid eye contact, not because you're tired, but because you're anxious. You don't speak up, not because you're content in silence, but because you're afraid of being judged. Fear uses stillness to stay hidden. Real introversion uses stillness to grow. Here's a clear example. A true introvert may leave a party early because they're mentally tired and need space to recharge. A person running from fear may not show up at all, not because they're recharging, but because social situations trigger their anxiety. The outside behavior may look the same, but the reason behind it is completely different. Fear-based withdrawal keeps you in survival mode. It tells you, don't speak, don't try, don't risk. But introversion doesn't whisper fear, it speaks wisdom. The introvert can engage when needed, and they often have powerful insights to share. But fear tells you your voice is dangerous. That's not introversion. That's a wound pretending to be a personality. If you've never asked yourself why you stay silent, why you avoid others, or why you shrink in group settings, this is the time. Because if your silence is coming from fear, then no label will bring you peace. It will only trap you. You don't need to change your nature, but you do need to know what's fear and what's real. Fear doesn't come out of nowhere. It's learned. It's built over time, moment by moment, experience by experience. And often it starts early. Maybe you raised your hand once in class and got laughed at. Maybe you opened up to someone and they dismissed you. Maybe you were told to lighten up when you were just being yourself. These moments may seem small, but to a sensitive mind, they leave deep marks. When those marks aren't healed, they turn into habits. You stop speaking before people can reject you. You avoid groups before they can ignore you. You call yourself introverted when the truth is, you just don't want to get hurt again. Fear, over time, shapes your behavior. And when that behavior becomes automatic, it starts to feel like identity. Carl Jung believed that parts of ourselves get pushed into the shadow when we feel ashamed of them. If you were once told your personality was too much or too serious, you might have hidden it away. That doesn't mean it disappeared, it just means you stopped showing it. And after hiding for so long, you started to believe that the quiet version of you was the real one. But it's not. That quiet isn't peace, it's armor. That silence isn't comfort, it's a wall. You didn't become introverted. You became cautious. You became guarded. You became someone who confuses emotional protection with personality. And the worst part, no one notices. They see you as calm, quiet, polite. But inside, you're screaming for space, for safety, for realness. And because fear hides so well behind the word introvert, most people never look deeper. They don't ask what's behind the silence. They don't wonder what pain shaped it, and neither do you. Until one day, you wake up and realize that you're not living. You're just avoiding life. You weren't born afraid of people. You weren't born scared to speak. That came from pain. And healing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means remembering who you were before. Fear told you to stay small. Living in fear doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always come with panic attacks or visible breakdowns. Sometimes it's much quieter. You show up where you're supposed to. You smile when people speak to you. You nod. You laugh. You say, "I'm just tired," when something deeper is going on. This is the quiet burnout, where your outside looks fine but your inside is slowly collapsing. When you keep calling fear personality, you end up building a life around something that isn't even true. You accept relationships where you're never fully seen. You agree to things that drain you. You avoid chances that might change your life. You play the part people expect. Reliable, calm, quiet. But the real you is buried under layers of pretending, and the cost of all that pretending, it adds up. You feel tired all the time, even after rest. You feel emotionally full, but also completely alone. You go through your day like you're on autopilot, doing everything right but feeling nothing real. You smile in conversations, but inside, you feel yourself fading. You've learned to hide so well that even you can't find yourself anymore. Carl Jung believed that when you live in a way that goes against your nature, your unconscious mind starts to fight back. It sends you signs, a heaviness you can't explain, a sadness that doesn't go away, a lack of meaning in everything you do. These feelings aren't random. They're signals. Your mind is telling you that something is wrong, that you've traded your truth for a version of yourself that feels easier to live with. But easy isn't the same as real, and safe isn't the same as alive. If you're constantly performing, acting like you don't care, avoiding conflict, staying quiet to keep the peace, you're not being true. You're surviving. And survival isn't the same as living. The longer you fake it, the further you drift from who you really are. One day you'll wake up in a life that looks okay on the outside but feels empty inside. That's not introversion. That's fear wearing a mask, and masks always crack eventually. Section 6. Differentiating inner stillness from inner hiding, 350-400 words. There's a difference between stillness and hiding, but most people confuse the two. Stillness is strength. It's the ability to sit with your thoughts, to hear your own voice in a loud world. It's choosing quiet, because it brings you peace. But hiding is fear dressed as calm. It's pulling back not because you want to, but because you're scared of what might happen if you don't. When you're still, you're present, you're grounded, you're able to connect when you choose to, but you're not desperate to be seen. You're comfortable in your own space. That's true introversion. But hiding feels different. You're not resting, you're waiting, you're not recharging, you're avoiding. You say, I just like being alone, but deep down, you're afraid that if people really saw you, they'd leave. That's not stillness, that's fear. Carl Jung talked about individuation, the process of becoming your true self. He believed this only happens when you stop performing and start facing what's inside. That includes fear. That includes pain. That includes all the parts of you that you've been calling just who I am, when really, they're who you became to stay safe. So how do you tell the difference? Ask yourself one question. Am I at peace or am I protecting myself? Stillness feels open, honest, and clear. Hiding feels closed, tense, and heavy. Stillness gives you room to think. Hiding makes you feel stuck. Stillness feels like returning to yourself. Hiding feels like losing yourself. You deserve stillness, but not the kind that comes from fear. You deserve quiet, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you've already said what matters. You deserve solitude, not because the world hurts, but because your mind is rich with thought. Don't confuse fear with identity. You are more than your defenses. And every time you hide, you teach yourself to believe the lie that you're too fragile for life. You're not. You've just been protecting yourself for so long you forgot that you're allowed to live fully. Stillness should heal you, not isolate you. If your silence is making you feel small, it's not silence. It's a signal, and it's time to listen. Section 7. How to return to the real you, 350-400 words. If fear shaped who you've become, then honesty is how you find your way back. Not honesty with others, honesty with yourself. You have to ask the hard questions. When did I stop trusting people? When did I start believing that my voice didn't matter? When did I trade my real self for the safe version of me? The return to your true self doesn't happen all at once. It's not some big dramatic moment. It's slow, quiet, but powerful. It starts with small choices. Saying no when you mean no. Saying yes only when it feels right. Speaking, even when your voice shakes. Choosing to show up as you are, not as who you think people want. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before fear took over. Carl Jung said that individuation, the journey back to your real self, requires facing the shadow. That's the part of you you've hidden. Your anger, your sadness, your need for connection. All of it is part of you. And it's not weak. It's real. You don't need to prove your worth by being quiet. You don't need to stay small to feel safe. The real you is not loud, but you are clear. You are thoughtful, you are deep. And you don't need permission to be that person. Start protecting your energy without feeling guilty. Start spending time with people who see you, not just tolerate you. Start building a life that makes space for your rhythm, your pace, your truth. Let your silence be full of meaning, not fear. Let your boundaries be clear, not defensive. Let your presence be a choice, not a performance. The world doesn't need another person pretending to be okay. It needs you, whole, grounded, and real. Not just quiet, but true. And maybe that truth was never gone. Maybe it was just waiting for you to stop calling fear your identity and start calling it what it really was, a warning sign. Now that you've heard it, you can begin again, not from fear, but from freedom. Section 8. Final message and call to action. 150 words. You were never broken. You were never too quiet. You were never less than anyone else. You were just scared. And that fear built a life around you that didn't reflect who you really are. But now, you see it. You feel it. And you know, it's time to come home to yourself. You don't need to be louder. You need to be honest. You don't need more friends. You need more truth. You don't need to fit in. You need to stop shrinking. Carl Jung believed that wholeness doesn't come from becoming what the world wants. It comes from becoming who you were before fear told you to hide. That version of you is still here, waiting. Comment below. I'm ready to meet who I really am. And if this spoke to something inside you, subscribe. This is not about performing anymore. This is where you stop hiding and start becoming.